Welcome to Neutral Exposure, a space for reflection and inspiration with photographers across a range of disciplines. My name's Al Simmons. This episode is with science, tech and advertising photographer Benedict Redgrove. I hope you enjoy.
I guess I'm kind of well known for a couple of things, which is the sort of style of photography I shoot, which tends to be quite clean and graphic and technical. That's pretty much the same for the subject matter as well. So I shoot a lot of engineering, design, concepts, technology. So anything from like a fusion reactor, which we've just shot recently with Wired, right down to some tennis shoes, which I did for ASICS last year. So it's kind of a broad spectrum commercially. And then personally, it's probably more the sort of technical engineering space side of things.
And that's an interest of yours, and that's kind of where you've taken your photography, or did that just happen through some clients you were working with? Or
I think that's always been. I mean, the sort of technology engineering space side of things has been something that's been with me since day dot. I mean, I know people say their earliest memory is of whatever, but I genuinely, my first memory is seeing a man walk on the moon. Obviously not from the moon, but I was in a pram in a dark room, and in that room was a black and white TV, and on that set was I'm not sure which mission it was. Probably not the first, but maybe like 14 or 15. So it's an early memory of mine, and I think my whole childhood has been sort of based around science fiction, technology. Those were the things, the sort of the excitement of exploration, and then a real love of engineering and design. Those things combined, that's what really sort of gets me going, really.
Okay, and photography itself, was that something you picked up at a fairly young age, or?
Yeah, 8.
Okay, wow.
8. I had my first camera. My dad made me buy it from him, and it was a little Kodak, a tiny little Kodak grey camera with a little silver shutter square button on it, and you would load a cartridge in there. I think what were they called? There's a little cartridge that was slot in the back, I used to photograph my brothers and photograph the building an extension of the garden and everything, and it sort of went on from there, really. Shot during school, and then I would sort of, when I left art college, I worked for 6 years as a graphic designer.
Okay.
In various design departments of agencies and things around London and outside London, and that sort of taught me that sort of love of space and clean aesthetic is where a lot of my work is based. And then while I was doing that work, I was also shooting, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do at that time. So I thought I wanted to be a reportage photographer. That was the sort of dream, was to go off and shoot in war zones and sort of have that exciting life. And so I did a lot of news stories for a while, and whenever I was shooting sports events as well, and I'd always try and shoot them in a sort of slightly documentary but at the same time quite clean way. There was always a story to everything I shot, and I think that kind of continues in a lot of work that I do now. But one day I was at a magazine, and I was waiting to go in to see the art director, and outside was a photojournalist who was also waiting to go in, and I think we've met somewhere before, so I was just asking him what he was doing there. This was, I think he was going to see a Liverpool Football Club's magazine.
Okay.
So we swapped folios. So I had a look through his, and he had a look through mine. And by the time I got halfway through his book, I realised that is probably not for me. It's he was there so that he could shoot something a little bit more. What did he say? Just with less death, I think was his.
Like a bit less gore. Yeah.
Less gore and death. And so he wanted to go to these football matches and photograph people having a great time and without the risk of being shot or dying of famine or whatever. So it was a genuine thing, and I could see it in his eyes. And by the time I'd looked through his folio, it was there's such a harrowing experience seeing those things, seeing them as a photograph. And then and I was pretty sure at the time my makeup, my personal psyche could not handle that. And unfortunately, I found myself in a couple of those situations later on in life, in sort of disaster zones and relief areas. And I think once you see that stuff, you can't unsee it. You know, you can't unsmell the smell. You can't take away the experience and the memories. And so I realized that was the right choice. I mean, I genuinely know what a flashback is now, and for anyone with sort of PTSD, or with a soldier returning or a journalist returning who's saying they have flashbacks, it is a horrific experience. It's something that you can't turn it off, and you can't stop it. You just have to let it run its course. And it is these sort of visceral images that flash in front of your eyes, and you shut your eyes and you try to make them stop, but they just keep going, like a terrible flick book. And so I am so 100% certain that I chose the right course of work, which is, to me, is it's not showing the brighter side of life at all, but it's certainly showing an interesting part of life that I think a lot of people probably don't get to see.
Yeah, you do get to go to some pretty unique places, and I mean, you mentioned how your graphic design background has kind of influenced the style, and I think you do have quite a distinctive style in kind of minimal composition, but then there's a lot of detail there as well, and be quite interesting to how does that reflect how you see the world, the way that you shoot and compose, how does that what how do you think that kind of mirrors?
I mean, it's a good point. It wasn't until about 10 years ago that I think I really started to understand that I see things slightly differently. When you're having a conversation with someone, you're talking about your surroundings or what you're going to go and do or where you've been. I tended to talk of things in sort of quite a straight kind of way, and was quite direct about the objects and how they were. And I remember, I think I've always seen things either in their singularity, and if I've seen them in their singularity, then I see ways of seeing around that, these planned views. And I think that's a sort of influence from slight sort of being on the spectrum a little bit, like, in that way. And I think there's also that thing of a technical engineering. So whenever I used to love looking at blueprints of things and engineering drawings of things, and they're obviously showing things in plan view and from different perspectives. I love architectural drawings, and all of these things make sense to me by seeing the sort of parts of something and seeing the different views. Then you sort of make a 3D render in your head,
Yeah, sure.
And so I tend to shoot like that, and it's all part of that story as well, of seeing things as a story. So one object, you can shoot it in different ways and make up this story from the macro parts. Say, for example, one of the new EMU, or the latest EMU helmet that the astronauts wear on spacewalks. So that's made up of lots of different components, and you put them together and you've got this incredible helmet which symbolizes exploration, and so there's lots of things going on there. There's all the metaphors, there's actual technical engineering, there's material changes, there's design aesthetic. So there's lots of things to show, and I feel like whenever I'm trying to show those objects, it's from the macro, from the tiny scratches on the gold visor right up to the actual object itself. And I think that's how I tend to see everything. And then I see things in sets, so I'll see that one helmet and then the other helmets that we've shot in the process. And it does make you look at things in a slightly different way. And whenever my day-to-day sort of activities tend to be quite focused on certain things.
Okay.
A fixation with stuff, I would say.
Yeah, and was it kind of your route into full-time professional photography? Was there any kind of challenges to maintaining your vision? Did you have to kind of compromise much along the way to kind of, I suppose, get to the position where you are now?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually. I would say because you don't go into I didn't go into something with this vision of how it's going to be. It's pretty much a development as I've gone on. My work has definitely developed to me anyway. So you sort of move forward in certain aspects, and I think once you start believing in what you're doing, then that helps with that sort of pressing forward, and you start to get
people start believing in you more, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really an arrogance, but it's more of a self-determination of like, this is, you know, I can feel this. There's a resonance inside me when I look at something, and I know, for example, if we're going to go on a shoot and it's a commercial job, if I can't picture that job before we go on it, then it's not really going to be as successful as one that I could have a total clear vision of exactly how I want it to look. And so I think it's the same when you're developing your work. If you sometimes it's a little bit clouded and you're a bit unsure of what you're doing. So with me, it has been that slow development. I sort of went about it in a reverse way. So I left my graphics job. I was already shooting by the time I left as a graphic designer. I was already shooting sports events and some architecture and travel. But because I haven't, you know, I taught myself basically. I've got no formal training. So I thought I really should try and understand this a bit better if I'm going to try and make a living out of this.
Sure.
So I started assisting a couple of photographers, and I did that for a while. And I wasn't a particularly wonderful assistant because I'd already tasted the work side of it, knew what I wanted to do, but was picking up little bits as I went. And then I think when I started shooting, there was a definite style as to what, you know, how things were going to go. Yeah, that sort of took root in the editorial years, I think, really.
Yeah, and you know, the work that you do is so very kind of heavily compositional, and you know, there's clearly quite a lot of control behind it. But have you kind of maintained, I suppose, that approach of reportage or documentary in the actual process of your shooting as well?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it might not be so apparent in the end result, perhaps. It's certainly there when I'm thinking about it. The sort of early production stages and throughout the shoot, actually, I'm always looking at how can I make a sort of, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a documentary, style, because that would suggest, no retouching, no nothing.
Sure.
There's evidently post-production in what I do because I want things to look this kind of ultra clean.
And it's as far from shooting from the hip as you could get. It's very composed.
Yeah, it is. Although, and I think a lot of that's come about through, when I started shooting, we were shooting on sort of, I was shooting on an RZ. Those were the cameras we started when I started shooting commercially. And I love that format, that 6:7 format. It was just, I still think it's one of the best formats ever made. So that slows you down automatically, and then you start to be very, very careful about the composition. And I was already quite graphic when I was shooting with I had a Nikon F3 with a motor drive MD4 drive on it. So that was a weapon, that camera. But it was bloody amazing, that made you slow you down a little bit as well. But then you start shooting on an RZ, slows down even more. Then I shot 5.4, even more slow. But you're really careful about what's in the frame, what's not in the frame. And so that tended to guide how I worked a little bit. But recently, I think because camera technology's moved on so much, and with the digital 35mm cameras now, you've got a high resolution image on there that's very good, and the lenses now that are coming out are just fantastic, So I think I'm sort of moving a little bit back to using that format that's slightly easier to work with. I can shoot more images during the day because I'm able to move around a lot more, and the image quality is where I want it to be.
Okay.
And now it's just coming down to the systems that you like. How does it feel in the hand? How's the UI, all that kind of work. But so there's a definite difference now between, can I shoot it on medium format? Have I got the time? Is it, are the sort of facilities there to allow you to do that? If so, then yes, we'll do that. And if not, then we'll shoot on the 35mm on the DSLR.
And what was in terms of transitioning between working on 35mm film or 5x4 or the RZ, what was your first transition into digital as well? And I suppose particularly medium format, knowing that you are.
We were shooting a job for GE in Germany. This is years back, and when we used to shoot on so I had a 503 CW Hasselblad with we were shooting on a P45 then, and then moved on to the P65 plus, which is quite a big markup difference in quality of imagery and available light and all that kind of stuff. And so I've always shot with those backs, and now it's onto an IQ3 with a 100 megapixel back on that, and that's a very different beast altogether. It's sort of, the quality's there. I mean, it's ridiculous. The quality is ridiculous on those things. It's so high. It's not even worth making a comparison. But I think that the vision is still there, though. If you have the time to compose an image on that, there's a certain satisfaction in the way you're working, that feeling back through when you're looking through the lens, you're looking through the viewfinder, or you're looking on your laptop. There's something that you've got. It's a bit more instant on a 35mm, and I'm still trying to get my head around how good the image quality is in those 35mm. But when you're there with that digital back, knowing you can crop in or whatever you need to do as well later on, they're pretty good. And then things like focus stacking, which I know is available on 35mm cameras too, but there is there's a quality there that is just ridiculous.
I mean, I as in my own work, I put quite a lot of value in the process. I like that slow process and really kind of taking time before even pressing the shutter to is everything lined up how it should be? Is that is the shot going to be is it going to be what I want it to be? And I think that very much differs to the handheld 35mm kind of the more run and gun approach.
Absolutely. I mean, when we started the NASA project, talking of taking time to get your first shot, I mean, that was 5 years of taking the first picture. The first shot we took was inside the space station trainer at Houston. So we were standing inside there shooting the Japanese lab. And so I stood there with my assistant, and we spent ages. We shot that on an Alpa with the P65 back on it. And I remember getting that set up, and that's
no live view.
That was particularly difficult. You're working on a really difficult technical camera that is you have to set up perfectly, or else nothing's going to be sharp. And then you've got to line everything up, and then you've got to make sure you kind of run through this section of shooting all 4 quadrants to make sure that you are actually square onto an object that actually isn't square itself.
Yeah, brilliant.
That was a bit of a head free. So that was fun. But that process though is so, you have to be so sure of what you're doing, and because you're spending a lot of time on this, and you don't have a lot of time to do it. So you need to make sure that you do your one shot you're going to take of that is as good as it can be. Given the circumstances and environmental impacts that you have out there of things that aren't lining up. So it is process to me is a massive part of it. And that when you look back over the images where you spent a lot of time thinking about something and actually putting your heart and soul into that shot, I think you get a reward back from that. Whether others do,
I would agree though. Well, that takes us nicely onto the NASA project, which I think it's an obviously monumental project. But it'd be really good, just to hear a bit about how that came about. How did you begin working with NASA and get the kind of access that you've ended up getting?
So I briefly touched on there. So it took it was about 4.5 years from me having the initial idea to speaking to the right people and getting the permission. NASA's it's a government-run organization, and so you have people that are working for one department who then need to speak to another department who then need to get clearance, who then it just goes up and up and up. And really, it took a long time to find the right people to then get them to say, okay, actually, if you're going to do this, this is what you need. We sort of after about 2 years, we got to speak to a couple of the sort of quite like seriously high guys there, and I ended up on a phone call to one of them, and he just said, the project's too big. You need something to happen. You need to cut it back, and then we can start looking at it. So I cut it back from everything I wanted to do. The original project idea was just to shoot spacesuits. Then I got and I jumped the gun a little bit and tried to sort of cover everything that NASA did, all their sites, everything. Which, you know, would have been lovely, but I think time-wise and everything else, it was probably impossible. But eventually, my friends at Wired magazine helped me out with the sort of initial getting in there. So yeah, UK Wired basically were very good supporters and helped me out. And then from there, I developed a good relationship with all the people in the PR departments at the various sites. And eventually we did the first shot, as I said, after 4.5 years. And then it sort of built up. You know, there's a level of trust, I guess, you have to establish, and, you know, I mean, it's like all things in life, right? Just be nice, be a nice person, talk to people the way you want to be spoken to, and you know, don't do things that you shouldn't be doing. So that seems to stand me in quite good stead with them. And then we spent the next 4.5 years shooting at various locations, you know, building up different kinds of a sort of shot list of where we wanted to go with it. The program progressed from there, and now, you know, obviously it then turned into the book, which so the original plan for the project was to make an exhibition. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to show the images in a way that the public, or the, you know, whoever's coming to see them, would understand how I feel about space exploration, design, and NASA. So the main example being the spacesuit. So, you know, when you think about an astronaut, you tend to think of someone in a spacesuit. That's kind of the sort of vision most people have.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of that association between person and suit, the technology and the human interaction, that when you see the suit, I wanted you to have this kind of feeling of awe and reverence in the same way that I do towards them. So the idea was to print the suits up to about, the suit would be, I worked it out now, we projected it in the end against the wall to work out the ultimate size, but 6'11". If the suit's 6'11", it's not big enough that it's over normal size, that it has to be, but not too large that it starts to look a little bit comical. And then it's on a sheet that's about 9 foot, and that's 1 foot off the ground. So you have this kind of iconic image, you know.
And is that still an idea to kind of put it together as an exhibition? You know, what's the next stage?
Yeah. So the book was going to be, originally was just going to be something small to accompany
a little zine, you know.
Well, pretty much, right? That's what it was going to be. But then it turned into this 384 page, 200.
I've not held it in my hands, but it looks monumental in itself.
It's large. It's just over 5 kilos, so 11 pounds. And it is, it's a lot of people when they get it, they're like, oh yeah, it's pretty big. And it's, you know, and so my graphic background helped me. I mean, I produced the whole thing, so I designed it and laid it all out. And it's a fairly weighty tome. But the exhibition now the idea for the exhibition has kind of progressed, and there are sort of a couple of parts to it now, where it's going to be more of a sort of experiential thing for a couple of rooms that will make this comparison between you having this awe and reverence towards these objects. So I as the project's progressed, I've learned a lot more about why I'm making it, which is a really interesting thing, which is something that had never really occurred to me. You know, obviously love space, obviously love engineering, obviously love NASA, but why am I wanting to show these things in their singularity, and what's so important for me to make other people try and understand that? And I kind of looked at it apart as a comparison to a sort of religious calling almost. So when I saw Space Shuttle Atlantis for the first time, there was a definite reaction I had to this, where this was something that I'd revered throughout my childhood. And I was standing next to an object that had been launched into space, it's traveled at, 17,500 miles an hour, orbit the Earth, numerous missions of very importance. And there it was in front of me, this incredible object. And I don't really get blown away by many people, actors, sports stars, celebrity thing. Just it doesn't really mean much to me. But you throw me in a room with a scientist or something, I'm suddenly like, wow, this is an incredible person. And you put me in a room with an object like that, and there is I have this enormous sense of kind of overwhelming reverence towards it. And so I wanted to make that scene, or that feeling felt by the people.
So it's kind of grown beyond purely the images themselves. It's more.
Yes, and I think and I think it is that thing of the objects are all greater than the sum of their parts. They have this energy now. So when you go and see some moon rocks, that's not just a rock, right? That's something that's been on the moon. That's something that's incredibly financially valuable to some people, but more emotionally and sort of, I would say, sort of kind of spiritually valuable are the ones. If you let someone hold that, then they will feel something incredible. I got given to hold one of the lunar Hasselblads that all the Apollo crews had used to train with, and I get quite emotional when those things are sort of thrust upon me, and my assistant will tell you there was definitely a tear when I was holding that thing, because you take the back off, and there's the ground glass with those crosshairs on. You can't help. Every Apollo crew has held this camera and used it, and B, it's just that sort of connection with something that I hold incredibly dear.
Wow. And you mentioned the kind of that first shot. You were kind of, I suppose, slightly up against the pressure to get it. And did that process change as the project went on? Were you able to have a bit more freedom with the objects and more time to be able to produce what you wanted to produce? Or?
It's a really interesting process, actually. So, like I say, 4.5 years to get that first one, and we were there for 2 days or a day and a half photographing inside the space station. And then when we were leaving that building, we went out to a different entrance where they had some of the Robonauts and older generation ones and the new ones. And so we would then say, well, can we photograph that? But then you have to reapply for everything. So there's an application process. Obviously, fly back to London, work on the shots, then fly back and do it all again. So it's an expensive project to do. Me and my retouchers worked it out, and I'm not going to go into the figures, but it was a frightening. You could.
It was a 10-year project.
10-year project, and you could easily buy a house. And it was a ridiculous amount. But it's once you start on that road, you just carry on through. And so each time we would tend to sort of know what we wanted to shoot. While we were there, we'd probably see something that we didn't realize we could. I mean, for some instances, I wanted to go and shoot some suits. So I went and spoke to the suits team and spent a day with them. And whilst I was there, we'd come up through the back of this building. It's kind of a maze over at NASA. And we'd come up back through a part of the building, walk past through this hallway, and in the corridor was this glass cabinet with all these sort of incredible artifacts in. And I've shot in various places where people who work there will collect the objects that they're working on. If they're not being sort of remade into another development of a prototype, invariably someone there will be this kind of slightly nerdy historian, and so they'll go, we should keep that for posterity. And luckily, for my luck and the project's sake, a couple of the guys had done that over the years, and so they had some of the helmets from the space shuttle era, the launch helmets. They had blood going right back to Gemini and Mercury, and these are all originals. This stuff is incredible. And I looked at the cabinet and just said, wow, is there any way we can get access to that? And so they kindly said yes, and then they proceeded to break in because nobody had the key. So I was at NASA with them breaking into a glass cabinet, which was quite good fun. But yeah, I mean, moments like that are pretty incredible, really, to get access to those things, see the areas that we got to see, and have the support. It's pretty incredible.
Were the images? Did they have a kind of a value to NASA as an organisation?
Well, I mean, NASA obviously can't, because they're a government-funded organisation. They can't be seen to be promoting somebody else's private or art project, I guess. I mean, the people I know at NASA who have seen it, all they really like it. They really enjoy it. I've got people at SpaceX and JPL and all those people that the book's sort of been sold to various people there, and they all like it. I've only had positive feedback from them, and it's that's nice. I've had some emails from people who worked at NASA for years, and sort of engineers and things, and they all say, they make some lovely comments, and the ones that are really nice are things like, I've worked on this stuff for years. I've worked on the Apollo program. I worked on the shuttle, and it's nice to see something in a way that we see it, that's a really lovely comment. That I've managed to show something that an engineer sees. I
guess it goes back to your enthusiasm in the subject itself. That comes across in the images.
Yeah. I mean, you're all. I mean, this is something I say to a lot of people who are starting out, which is, shoot what you really enjoy and shoot what you love, because you're going to put more of yourself into that. If you're just copying what other people do, or you're, doing something because you think you should be doing it, then you're never going to bring yourself into that. You can only put what you love or your view of something into your project. So I mean, I've definitely, I respect great engineering and great design, and I love technology, and I love exploration, no matter where it is, but particularly space exploration. And a thirst for knowledge, is how that's one of the greatest things we've got, right? There's a brain that we can feed all this information to. So the space program to me is, in every single form, it brings something to everyone's daily life, whether that's research into materials or research into human physiology. All of that stuff is, a lot of it stems from there.
And how important was the resolution to the project, in terms of how you wanted to display it or your vision for it? How important was the medium format, essentially?
Well, I mean, vital. Yeah, there's no sort of two ways about it, really. If I could have had one of the new 150 backs when we started shooting, then I would be a very happy man, because we were sort of stitching P65 images together, and of course you're not using the full area of that. So and the intention being that each of these images we want to print as large as possible. So I was saying the suits are 6'11". We did one of the shots of Atlantis engines was made up of 40 exposures, so that's focus stacking on an alpha. On the XY axis, so top. You've got to be bloody sure, right? I mean, you need to make sure that what you're doing is working. So I think the hardest one I did was I shot the Saturn V engines from the back on my own, on an Alpa, on an XY, blind. So I had the camera up on the top of the tripod, but I could just about reach I had to make sure I could cock the shutter.
Wake it up.
And then cock the shutter and then wind the back cross up down. So I spent like an hour just getting this thing lined up and square. I'm pretty sure it's not bang on. It's pretty close. But it spent a long time with kids walking past going, what are you doing? What are you doing, mister? It was
being the object of interest while you're at NASA.
Yeah. Exactly. But you know, if there'd been a higher resolution back, then I would have loved it, because it's really hard. It's like, you know, when you explain to someone about a focus stack on a camera, it's not just that the image is sharp. There's an extra dimension to it. It's not just you seeing it sharp all the way through. You're seeing it better than you. It's almost better than it is in real life.
You've got that impossible depth.
It's the impossible depth, and everything is so incredibly crisp because you're using that, you know, that best bit of the lens. You're using the best bit of everything basically, and it really does work. It shows up so beautifully, especially on those things like Atlantis engines or the front of the shuttle. I had a guy, one of my collectors bought a shot of the front three-quarter view of the shuttle, so it's kind of canted at an angle, and it's really interesting when you talk to different people when they're buying a print. These are large format prints. You know, they're the smallest ones we tend to do are like 5 foot by 4 foot, so 1.2 by 1.5 meters. They're, you know, pretty big, and they go up to 12 foot by 8 foot, I think, or 12 foot by 10 foot. So they're big. But you know, when the thing that he was talking about was the detail. He wanted to see that detail in the fabric that's around the space shuttle, and it, you know, it's there. It's really beautifully crisp and clear. And you can't get that on. You know, you've got that lovely big center, and then when you're stacking as well, it's
unreal nice detail. What's I suppose, in light of everything that's going on at the moment, you know, I'm assuming the timeline for the exhibition has shifted quite a lot. You know, kind of what's I suppose it's a unanswered question at this stage, but have you got any sense of when that might be possible, or
it's because the exhibition itself, the sort of the fundamental part of it has changed. We now have to sort of look at slightly different venues that can house it, and also we need probably some fairly serious funding for it as well, and also people that are going to, you know, believe in it. So whether that's various backers, really, I would think. So that has changed so much that we're having to speak to different people now that we spoke to recently. So I would say stay tuned. You know, there'll be news on that as soon as we've got more news on when it might potentially happen. Then I'll certainly put it out.
Have you got anything else you kind of touched on what might be kind of cooking underneath this kind of next projects, but have you got anything kind of that you'd had big for this year planned, or outside of that stuff?
There's a project that I'm supposed to do with European Space Agency that, again, that this is, you know, obviously put a lot of hold on that project, and there's a project that I was shooting at the same time as the NASA project was finishing, which is a set of films and some still sort of a photographic project as well. So that's at the end of that project, and then there's 2 others that I'm trying to start that will be really nice as well if we can get them off the ground.
And with everything that's going on, if you weren't able to work with photography, you know, what would be keeping you sane at this point, or what might have to keep you sane in the months to come?
Well, I mean, I'm literally redoing, so sort of updating website design. So that's you know, I'm basically doing what I would be doing, but just without the shooting element at the moment. So I'm working on how that's all going to change, and just general commercial folio work, and then also development of the exhibition. So that's kind of it's quite an in-depth project, and then the sort of production side, the pre-production part of the next projects as well, which takes a bit of research, and it's, again, you know, I had ideas to start two other projects, but I started going into production on that, and then realized that other people were probably doing something, might be
Right.
doing something similar, or had started something similar. So I'm not one to do what
Sure.
everyone else is
Yeah.
doing. So I just abandoned it. That's like six to 8 months work that I've just
Okay.
cut because
Yeah.
kind of do it. So I'm going to carry on with the 2 others that I know are have not been done, and try and get those off the ground. I think those will be those are certainly something that is of interest to
Oh,
me.
it sounds interesting. I mean, it sounds like you've got enough to keep you occupied while you're in isolation.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's safe to say the project is pretty incredible, and I think you know, we linked to your website at the beginning, and there's a lot of information on there, and you know, people should absolutely check it out. And when the time comes to see it somewhere, yeah, I look forward to the update. But yeah, no, it's been good to chat to you anyway. I mean, we'll round it up there. I mean, I suppose one last question would be, is there any I suppose kind of wisdom you would like, what if you were a photographer right now, and you know, you found yourself in this position of, you know, of kind of forced unemployment, you know, what would you kind of be focusing your attentions on?
I mean, as I touched on earlier on, I think, you know, do your own work. So find subjects that resonate with you. I think when the NASA project started, I was in a particular point that was quite low on creativity. I think on my own personal work, I was doing a lot of commercial work, but there was nothing that was really satisfying me. And so I think really, you know, use this time to, don't use inactivity for a lack of production is quite.
I like that.
So I think you know, just use this time to let your ideas sit with you, and see what starts to, you know, be that little itch that you have to scratch. There's normally something that you feel, or certainly from my own personal point of view, if I'm thinking of an idea, or if there's a project that I'm still starting to touch on, then there is a bit of you that starts to feel right about that subject and wants to explore. And the ones that I feel are pushed are the ones that don't tend to be right. And you're doing a lot of work that doesn't feel right. So do the thing that resonates with you, and use this time to find out what that is.
Excellent. I like it a lot. Well, yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, man.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Have a nice week.